Welcome to our deep dive today. We're tackling a topic that just never gets old for me, the evolution of human language.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a puzzle with pieces scattered across, like our brains, our societies.
In our history, I mean, think about it. We've got Darwin's theories on evolution and sexual selection. We're going to be looking at research into the origins of the modern mind and a deep dive, literally a book called The Recursive Mind.
Yeah, we've even got some excerpts on how, the nitty-gritty of language structure plays into all of this. It's going to be amazing.
Our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to extract those golden nuggets of insight about what makes us, well, US, what makes humans unique.
And how language, this thing we often take for granted, really shaped who we are and how we think.
Okay, so Darwin, right. Everyone knows him for survival of the fittest, natural selection, the whole bit. But I was reading his early notebooks, and wow, he was already thinking about humans and language way back then.
It wasn't just a side thought either. He saw studying humans as absolutely essential to understanding, well, the whole picture of evolution.
I found this quote that just blew me away. He wrote, "He who understands baboon would do more toward metaphysics than Locke."
Whoa.
Right. He's basically saying, forget philosophy. Studying primates is the key to understanding the human mind.
Yeah. It was radical for his time, putting humans right in the middle of the evolutionary story, not, separate from it.
Mm-hmm.
And that led him to think about how even language, this complex thing, must have evolved.
He imagined these stages, right? Like rudimentary song at first.
And vocal imitation, copying sounds.
And finally, bam, articulate language. It makes you wonder, what did those early forms of communication even sound like? Would we even recognize them?
Ooh, good question. Some researchers think that even before those vocalizations, humans were using something called mimesis.
Mimesis sounds kind of theatrical.
Think of it like communicating through action, miming emotions, showing a skill, even acting out social roles, all without, needing words.
So, instead of explaining how to use a tool, you just show me by doing it. Do we still use mimesis today?
Oh, totally. Think about how we use gestures or even act things out in our minds to understand them. That's mimesis at work. And it relies on episodic memory, remembering specific events, something we share with apes.
So it's like a glimpse into the prehistory of language. It's wild to think language grew out of something so physical, rooted in action.
Now, fast forward to the invention of writing. It was like a boom. Suddenly, our brains had external storage.
Right. Our sources call this theoretic culture, sharing and building on knowledge in ways that were impossible before. But what I found fascinating is how rare writing systems actually are.
Less than 10% of languages ever developed one, which blows my mind. Why is that?
Huh?
Was it because some cultures didn't need it? Or were there, social or cognitive barriers?
So it wasn't a guarantee that spoken language would lead to written language? Maybe languages could have evolved along different paths?
Absolutely.
Mm.
And even when writing did emerge, there were different approaches. The sources talk about 3 visuosymbolic paths: pictorial, ideographic, and phonological. Each one reflects a different way of seeing language on paper, and they likely influenced how people thought.
Okay, mind officially blown.
Yeah.
We've gone from grunts and gestures to complex writing systems. But what about the brains behind all of this? How did that organ evolve to handle something as crazy as language?
Buckle up, because this is the paradox. We tend to think our brains evolved, to a certain point, and then language just slotted in perfectly. But it's way more dynamic than that. Languages evolve much faster than brains do.
Wait, so it's not like our brains were just pre-wired for language. It was more like
Collaboration.
Yeah.
Our sources really emphasize that languages have to adapt to the limits of our brains, especially kids' brains, since they're learning language from scratch. And it's amazing languages have done most of the adapting.
Wow. So it's like languages are these living, evolving things shaping themselves to fit into our minds.
Exactly. Now, zoom in on those minds for a second. We all know about left brain, right brain, how they specialize. But with language, it's not as simple as, one side being the language area.
Yeah, I always heard left brain was all about logic and language, but it sounds more complicated than that.
Way more. Language functions are spread across different areas, interconnected. What's crazy is that stimulating some areas can disrupt language, but damage to those same areas might not even matter.
Whoa, so it's like our brains have a backup system for language, just in case.
It's possible. And to make things even crazier, even where you find those grammar modules in the brain, assuming they exist, can change depending on the language you speak. It shows how plastic our brains are.
Okay, so we've got these adaptable brains constantly changing languages, but how do we even get the physical ability to speak in the first place? Apes can't exactly give TED Talks.
True. And that leads us to the descent of the larynx in humans.
The larynx, isn't that like our voice box?
Yep. And it's much lower in humans than in other apes. This lets us manipulate sound way better, but it also comes with a risk.
A risk? What could be risky about having a lower voice box?
Choking. It's a bigger risk for us than for other primates because of that lower larynx. But the trade-off, getting to make all these cool sounds, seems like it was worth it. Even early hominids probably had a wider range of vocal flexibility than, like, chimps.
So we literally risked choking to death just so we could have richer language. Evolution takes some wild turns.
It does. This might seem like a jump, but to really get why language evolved, we got to talk about something kind of surprising: meat.
Meat? Like what's for dinner?
Exactly. But think about how eating meat affected human evolution. It's a paradox, see? Males had to work together to hunt, females needed the meat for energy. But how do they guarantee that males were taking care of their own kids, not someone else's?
Okay, yeah, I see where you're going. This is about social structures, right? Like the beginning of families and pair bones.
Exactly. Fidelity, both in hunting and in mating, becomes essential. The sources suggest that pair bonding and social pressure, maybe even early forms of gossip, were crucial.
So it was a balance, biology and social behavior working together to, well, get everyone fed and keep the species going.
And that ties in so deeply with how language itself evolved. We'll get into that more next time. But it's amazing how intertwined everything is.
I'm seeing the connections. Okay, we've covered a lot already, from Darwin's early ideas to the dance between brains, language, and keeping everyone in line socially.
It's been a blast. What's standing out to you the most so far?
Honestly, how active a role language has had in shaping us. It's not just a tool, it's a force. It's influenced our brains, how we live together, even our anatomy.
I love that. And it makes me wonder about something the sources didn't directly address. If our brains are so flexible and languages never stop evolving, what happens as technology keeps changing? What's the future of communication?
Whoa, good question. Are we headed for some huge cognitive leap? Will we be talking telepathically? Guess that's a deep dive for another day.
Maybe. But for now, let's shift gears. We've got to talk about sexual selection. Get ready for some fascinating stuff.
Oh, I'm definitely ready. Bring on the next layer of the deep dive. Okay, so we've explored natural selection, but now let's dive into Darwin's other big idea, sexual selection. It's not just about surviving, right? It's about attracting a mate.
Exactly. It's not always the strongest or the fastest that win the evolutionary game. Being attractive to the opposite sex plays a huge role, and you see that in all sorts of amazing displays in the animal kingdom.
Oh, totally. Like those peacock tails, so extravagant. Or like you hear those birds singing their hearts out to impress a potential mate. But how does that work for humans? We don't exactly have flashy feathers or build like elaborate nests.
True, but humans have our own ways of signaling, well, attractiveness. What do people find appealing in a partner? Intelligence, a sense of humor, kindness, even physical features, right? All of those can be seen as products of sexual selection.
So instead of a peacock showing off its tail, a human might, I don't know, tell a really good joke or demonstrate their knowledge about something.
Exactly. Darwin was fascinated by this idea. He even wrote a whole book about it. He noticed that in many species, it's the males who often have those elaborate displays. The bright colors, the complex songs and dances.
Why is it usually the males putting on a show?
Well, think about it. It comes down to how much each sex invests in reproduction. Females, in most species, they invest more time and energy, producing offspring, raising them. So they're pickier about who they mate with. Males, on the other hand, often maximize their success by mating with, well, as many females as possible.
Ah, so it becomes this competition for the males to prove themselves to the females. Like, hey, pick me, I've got the best genes.
Exactly. And this competition can lead to all sorts of intense behaviors, from elaborate courtship rituals to actual fights for dominance. Darwin called this the law of battle, males fighting for access to females.
Makes sense in the animal world. But do human males still do this law of battle thing? It's not like guys are out there dueling with swords for a date.
Not literally, of course.
Yeah.
But you see echoes of it in human behavior. Think about those displays of dominance, aggression, maybe even like the way some men compete with each other. It could be a way of signaling strength and attractiveness, even if it's not always conscious.
So that guy at the gym who's always grunting and flexing, maybe he's just tapping into some ancient mating ritual.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Human behavior is super complex, of course, and we're not just slaves to our evolutionary past. But it's fascinating to see these links between our animal nature and, well, who we are today.
It really is. You mentioned that females are choosier because they invest more in reproduction, but how do they actually choose? What qualities are they looking for in a mate?
Ah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Scientists have been trying to figure that out for ages. It seems like females are attracted to a whole bunch of traits, both physical and behavioral. For example, in birds, females often prefer males with brighter plumage, which could mean those males are healthier.
Like a flashy billboard advertising, hey, I've got good genes. So what about humans? What are we drawn to?
Well, research shows that, for instance, women tend to find men with symmetrical faces more attractive. And symmetry, again, can be a sign of good health. But it's not just about looks. Females are also drawn to behaviors that suggest a male would be a good parent.
Like with birds, how the male brings food to the female to show he can provide.
Exactly. It's all about demonstrating that ability to care for offspring. In humans, this translates to things like kindness, empathy, willingness to share resources. Good dad material.
This is making me rethink my whole dating strategy. But I'm also seeing how this connects back to language, right? If males are competing for attention and females are choosing based on certain traits, wouldn't that push the need for better ways to show off those qualities? Like language as a tool for self-promotion.
You're getting it. Language lets us express our intelligence, sense of humor, creativity, all things that can be attractive. We can share stories, which can show off our social status, our knowledge. It's all connected.
We've come a long way from those grunts and gestures, but it's wild to think that even our most complex language might still be influenced by that ancient drive to, like, attract a mate and impress them.
It's all part of the story. Now, speaking of showing off, we have to talk about ornamentation and sexual selection.
Ornamentation, you mean like jewelry and makeup?
That's part of it for humans. But in the animal world, it takes all sorts of forms.
Yeah.
Bright feathers, elaborate horns. These things often have no practical purpose other than attracting a mate.
It's like animal fashion. What are some cool examples?
Oh, bowerbirds are classic. The males build these incredible structures decorated with all kinds of colorful objects just to attract females.
Wow, it's like interior design meets a singles bar. And I guess for humans, you see this with clothing, jewelry, makeup, tattoos, hairstyles. It's all ornamentation, right?
It is. Ways of enhancing our appearance, signaling our attractiveness, even though the trends always change. But the underlying motivation, it's remarkably similar across species, across time.
I'm looking at the world differently now. Every fashion choice, every witty comment, every carefully crafted social media post, it all has this, like, ancient evolutionary history woven into it.
It's true. Our behaviors, our desires, our aesthetic preferences, they're all shaped by this long dance between survival, reproduction, attraction. But it's not just about individual choices. To really understand this, we have to talk about the role of social pressure.
Ooh, social pressure. Now we're getting into some juicy stuff. I can't wait to hear more about that. Okay, social pressure. Now, this is where I think things get really interesting. We humans, I mean, we're social creatures to the core, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
And remember how we were talking about like meat eating and how that kind of forced our ancestors into pair bonding and fidelity? Well, social pressure is what really keeps those things, those systems in place.
So it's not just pure biology, not just instinct. It was like our ancestors were actually policing each other's behavior through social pressure.
You got it. Think about it. Gossip? Keeping tabs on each other's reputations? That was crucial information back then. You needed to know who was reliable, who was going to share their resources, who's going to actually stick around and help raise kids.
Yeah, it's like if you didn't play by the rules, you might end up ostracized, right? No one wants to be the outcast.
Exactly. Even today, we see how social pressure shapes so much of what we do, from who we date to what we wear to, well, how we talk.
Oh, for sure. Like, I catch myself changing how I speak depending on who I'm with. But how does that tie back to language itself, like the actual nuts and bolts of language?
Well, some linguists think that certain parts of grammar, like politeness markers, saying please and thank you and all that, might have actually evolved because of social hierarchies.
Really? So it's not just about being polite, it's like a way of signaling your place in the social order, showing respect, avoiding conflict.
Exactly. It's subtle, but powerful. Even today, we shift our language depending on who we're talking to. Different vocabulary with our boss versus with our friends.
We're all doing this, like, intricate social dance, and language is the music.
I love that. It's how we build relationships, how we work together, how we create meaning as a group.
I never thought about language being so key to social cohesion, but it makes total sense. It's not just about getting information across, it's about connection.
Beautifully said. It really highlights how language goes so much deeper than just words. It's about who we are as social beings.
This whole deep dive has been incredible. We started with Darwin's early theories,
Hmm.
explored this whole dance between brains and language, and now we're seeing how social pressure fits into the mix. Mind-blowing stuff.
It really is. And honestly, we've only just dipped our toes in. There's still so much to learn about how language evolved and how it's still shaping us today. It's an ongoing story.
Well, I'm definitely ready to dive deeper in the future. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap things up?
The big takeaway, I think, is that language isn't just a tool. It's a fundamental piece of what makes us human. It shaped our brains, our societies, how we see the world. It's a story billions of years in the making, and, we're all part of it.
That's a powerful thought. The next time I speak or write or even just think, I'll definitely be remembering this incredible journey we've taken today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into language and evolution. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those big questions, and keep those brains buzzing.